Well, welcome back to Citizen Development Live. My name is Neil Miller. I'm your host. Today, our guest is George Forbes. He is the CIO and CDO of operations for a federal agency. George, welcome to the show today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. You have a very, very interesting story and a lot of experience with citizen development. But let's just start about how you first got interested in low-code, no-code platforms.
Well, I like to say that I like to build apps to feed my data habit because I'm a data scientist.
Yeah.
And what was occurring was my boss kept seeing these endless demonstrations by companies showing him an app, and they were just generalized as apps. And these apps kept coming at him, and he realized they were the same sort of series, same sort of content, the same sort of thing recurring. So he asked me to come in, and I quickly came to the same conclusion. So so I realized what was happening is people were rebuilding the same thing again and again and again, oftentimes to do the same thing again and again and again. But what was unclear was that there were stratifications of these types of things. So one of the challenges my bosses gave me was, George, please help us find a pathway for innovation. Because what was happening was that many of these applications were not being built solely by professionals, but generally by hobbyists.
Right.
In what I call a shanty town. We all know what a shanty town looks like, right? That shanty town is built out of scraps of residual lumber and tarps and paper and cardboard boxes, and you know it goes up very rapidly. It does its thing. It's not very durable. It's not very hardened. There's no standardization. It's a bit rickety, but it works.
Right. Yeah.
And they're all hobbled together in a big enclave, right? And you all have that image in your mind now, I think. And so the idea was, George, how do we do this kind of thing so that we can harness the innovation, can harness the rapid necessity for relevance? And the obvious experience that I've had in the past was that means low code, no code. So that's my origin story, and that's how I got into, if you will, how do we enterprise architect a way to do that?
Yeah, I love that image of the shanty town, because it's like, okay, what if you build all these things and then somebody wants to add plumbing to everyone, or you want to add in electricity to everybody else, and there's like no way to do it around this. That's a great image. I love that.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, it's not just plumbing or just electricity. It's 220 versus 110 too, right? I mean, it's
right.
Synchronicity and harmonization within the system and not just a system.
I love it. So that was your origin story. You've progressed quite a ways since then. So tell us a little bit about the successes you've had at your current organization, at the agency.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had some leaders who had some forethought, knowing that a large federal agency like I'm in, we have hundreds of thousands of users, hundreds of approaching millions of users in different domain space. But the idea here was that we needed to go from a lot of places where we kept data into a few places where we kept data. That's intuitive and obvious because of the technical debt, the financial debt, the carrying of the legacy systems. And so they chose 6 places. And then they were largely associated with job function. So an HR piece, a logistics piece, and an operations piece, multiple operations pieces, and which helped us go from many of many's to a few. Within our operations space, though, we decided that's really cool to go from many to 6, but you know what? That's just all of a sudden 6 languages we got to learn, and we had to carry six bundles of knowledge on how to maneuver and work within them, and then 6 connections to each one of those for everything that we needed. So we said, we took it one step further, and we said, let's converge in one spot. Now, it may not be optimal, but it was a moment of, trust me, I think you're going to like this. And so we chose one spot, and that one particular spot was a data as a service provider. And that's where we have where we started to understand the bifurcation of the applications. We were building a low-code, no-code environment. So we have really 2 essence of products. One are applications built surrounding data analytics in a low-code, no-code environment. And then another suite of applications that generate content and input of data, also in a low code, no code solution. And we're very firm and assertive about using only two solutions.
Hmm.
And they're not for the same thing. So you don't get two choices of white bread. You either get, one choice of white bread and one choice of tortillas, and that's it,
Yeah.
right? We're not talking about we're giving everyone a lot of boundaries. But by doing that, we've had great success. So you asked about that. Let me tell you two or three things. First of all, in that larger set of the data as a service in a low code environment, about 14 months ago, we had, in general, in my federal agency, around 6,000 users in that space on a regular basis, daily basis, if you
Mhm.
will. We went up to 62,000 in 14 months. So
Wow.
it was, slightly more than a 10x increase, which was fabulous for us, for a number of reasons we'll get to in a second. But even more importantly, within my domain space, I saw a similar growth rate. So within my great federal agency, there's around 70,000 in my operations enterprise. And we saw an increase from about 1,000 to about 7,000. So about 6,000 user increase in that same period of time. And what that did was give us great network effect, right? So we could begin to reuse data objects. We can begin to reuse code. We can begin to reuse things that are very important for us and very expensive to build for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're beginning to see economies of scale, economies of speed. We were beginning to see people wanting to edit a product rather than build a product.
Hmm.
And that's why we saw this growth rate. This growth rate could be done organically, but honestly, being a data scientist, I relied on something called Bass's law of diffusion, which you may have heard of. I think many people in marketing 101 sort of hear of this kind of thing. But but that cross solution technique, if you will, from marketing, we brought to the IT world because we understood that this is an emerging technology that needed to be adopted. So why not take advantage of natural laws? And as you probably know, many of your sophisticated podcast listeners know that there's an equation that governs that, and it's about a variable related to adoption or innovation, and another variable related to imitation.
Mm-hmm.
So we specifically tailored targeting groups that we knew would be early adopters in order for us to scream along the path of adoption and get to critical mass. And so we didn't leave it to chance. We promoted and we accelerated and we targeted our audiences in order to get there. Because I knew that once we had mass, we would start to see network effect. And that's precisely what we did. We saw
Yeah.
probably around 40 different data sets connected to our main data as a service. In 2 years, we're up to 100, just over 180 now.
Wow.
And as a result, right now, when you need HR data, you're not having to start from scratch. It's there. It's curated. There's a master golden record. There are multiple other ones. In fact, for our main HR record, we have about 138 versions. But I know which one is the true and authoritative one, and I know all those other subsequent branches and trunks. I know everything there is to know about them. So if I want to start with a rolling start, I can choose one of those other, knowing the origin story, the ontology of where it began. And I
Right.
can just start from there. I don't have to start from scratch. So that's another great part of the low code, no code solution for us. That's the data as a service. The other piece was this ingestion of new information through building an application, a true application that you're more familiar with. And again, having built applications in AWS, on-prem, through Oracle, and a whole number of different tech stacks that I've used in the past with a full stack developer and my whole, ICAM or identity management techniques and all of those kinds of things. It's a very expensive and time-consuming process.
Right.
And my agency, a federal agency, needs to have an authority to operate to field a particular application, which is very common in different industries, called different things in different places. But our authority to operate is very unique because every authorizing official sort of has their own rubric,
Hmm.
generally the same, but with nuances. So there's not a universal way for us to get an authority to operate. So that becomes a very insurmountable obstacle to overcome in order to field your app. So again, we wanted to find a way to use low code, no code solutions. And we went to software as a service versus a data as a service.
Hmm.
And of course, as you well know, and many of your users know, by doing that, you're preserving around 90 or more, in our case, 95% of every application is completed for us. We're just
Hmm.
configuring the last 5%.
Right, right.
And we're using that same ATO, that same authority to operate, because it's not buying new applications every time, it's configuring an existing one.
Hmm.
So we went from building applications that would take us tens of millions of dollars and it would take us several years to building applications in 179 days
Wow.
and costing at least 80 to 90% less than what we are traditionally paying for them. And I have a number, not just of market research, but I can show you my actual numbers. I can
Hmm.
show you the actual millions of dollars that we're saving, to the point that it's absolutely ridiculous, to the point that we're not going, why did we even do that before? And why
Yeah.
are we continuing to do that? Why don't we collapse all these other ones? Um, and of course, it makes sense for us. But I know there are a lot of detractors out there who worry about vendor lock. So
Yeah.
we've talked about that as well.
And I think that that's such an important point, because a lot of people probably are at that place where they have 6 to 10 or so platforms out there, and for them, the headache of trying to go down to two or so is seems too great to be able. So they're just going to deal with it. Anything you could say to those people to help them realize, hey, looking back on that season, making those decisions, does it seem like, hey, this was actually pretty easy to do, or was it quite difficult?
Generally, what we found were that most of the technologies are very similar in nature. What it
Right.
came down to was preference and cultural resistance.
Hmm.
So we made such a compelling case that for you to remain entrenched in your cultural ideology, is it worth it the cost that you're paying,
Hmm.
which was about 80%, 90% more than you would.
Right.
And if that's the case, what if we took a risk and replaced your product with one of these less expensive ones in a low code, no code environment at no cost to you,
Hmm.
and you built it? It became very compelling for them because, okay, there's no risk to them. It was a very low cost investment, and they did a proof of concept, and they realized how quickly they could do it, how more cost effective it was, and then it made that old style kind of seem not very well thought out, right?
Hmm.
You just went from this great muscle car, exquisitely built with all kinds of custom options on it, to a mass produced high end product that gives you a really great experience at a fraction of the cost. So
Right.
so that was part of it, was a compelling financial case and seeding them with some money, showing them proof of concept. Um, and the other thing was, we only built applications at the user level.
Hmm.
So it's very sexy to say we're going to have a consolidated IT office that's going to build it. And although you should have a consolidated office that orchestrates things, what we did is we took the money, we pushed it down to the lowest level, and we asked them to be the proponents to build it, because
Hmm.
that's where we oftentimes the place where we had the most resistance.
Yeah.
Because what we did was we were able to see them iterate and become believers themselves, which is also part of that fastest law of diffusion. We started turning those laggards into early adopters.
Hmm. Well, tell us more about the people who are actually building these applications. What's the skill set of these people? Are they in traditional IT roles? Are they outside of that?
Both. Sure. Early on, particularly doing these demonstrations and proof of concepts, we used and we seeded and populated the space mostly with professionals who knew what they were doing. But then we offered tremendous amount of hands-on training at many in different varieties. And then we used a couple of other techniques, in particular, agile development in the truest sense, with the
Mhm.
artifacts and the structure, human-centered design, which is another big element of it. Um, and so those two critical elements were common, if you will, to the early projects. People emulated that and started imitating those techniques.
Mhm.
And then what we saw early on was an imbalance towards professionals, to the point of imbalance towards uh, our homegrown organic capacity. So in what respect? I mean, that's cool to say that, but what's that mean? So in our population set of around 60,000 or so users, we have about 2,000 developers,
Hmm.
contractors, if you will.
Wow.
So that means the rest of my population set are government employees.
Hmm.
So that's all organic. So if you can imagine, right, somewhere around the 90% range is all organic. And then
Wow.
the next thing I looked at was who was doing that. And what I found was it was my managers who are about right in the middle. Our junior managers to our mid-level managers represented about 80% of that bell curve. And about half of them were degreed and about half of them were not degreed.
Hmm.
So what we were finding was it wasn't the professionals, it wasn't our IT and data science people. It was people who were doing their job but needed to do it faster, smarter, quicker, and remove the toil in their work. And they knew they could take a product and edit it and do their business faster than they could to put it through the system to get it built on their own. So we have quite a bit. Early on, it was the other way around. It's about 90% contractor and about 10% organic, and now it's flipped completely in the opposite direction. And we have about 50,000 apps built in our space, and nearly all of them have been built by organic users.
Wow. Those are some incredible numbers. Tell us about the support you have for that, because we think about, okay, how do we keep these apps running? What kind of maintenance plans do you have around them? Ownership of those? What does the team look like that supports that?
So it's really important to know it's all of these are as a service. So we moved our model from a very capital intensive buying a product, whether it's cloud or on-prem, building the full stack and owning it, to subscription. So it's like you buying a car versus leasing one, right? You put a couple $1,000s down on the lease and then you pay monthly. Similarly here, but we didn't put up that giant cash up front to own the car. So this monthly subscription pays contractors to do all the trivial stuff.
Hmm.
And I don't mean that it's technically trivial. I mean it's stuff that's not my core business.
Right. Right.
But my core business has nothing to do with IT. So I don't want my people learning how to do IT. I want my people learning how to do those workflows, to do those user interfaces, to get the most out of their data, the most out of their applications, but not have to learn how to get an authority to operate, or how to do ICAM, or how to do load balancing, or routing tables, or caching of different things. Those are all skills that I don't want them to learn. And honestly, those are skills that are kind of trivial, right? Most of the work that we're doing is things that everybody feels like is unique to them, but in the big scheme of things, it's trivial.
Right.
I have 17 applications that do scheduling that I know of that are big. We're going down to one.
Yeah.
Right. And come on, scheduling is not sexy. It's not unique. It's not custom. It's a person. It's an asset. It's a calendar. That's really the basis of it. Then it's a manipulation of those three things. So mostly all of my as a service is done through subscription based through contractor. I have very little by design do I have organic capacity to maintain these systems, which brings me to the other piece of vendor lock. I mentioned it a second ago. So I care about three things. I care about the data, which is owned by me inside of my systems anyhow. So I'm not worried about vendor lock there. I'm worried about the interface, which is more or less the business process, right? So if I have vendor A and I turn my business process into their user interface, or the other one, what's important to me is the intellectual property of that business process. And then the third thing is the code for that. And nowadays, low code, no code populates a code base that's in Python, which is very portable and transportable.
Mm-hmm.
So when people talk to me about vendor lock, I'm not so sure that that's the boogeyman that others feel is there. I don't look at it as vendor lock as much as it is vendor switch, right? Maybe you've heard that. I think some other clever people have used it and I've adopted it, but really it's the cost to move from one to the other. If you moved houses from one part of town to the other, you may pay the same amount of rent, but there's a cost to move you over there. But you're still living. You're still doing your business. You're still going to work. Your kids are still going to school. You're still making dinner at night. I mean, all those things don't change. It's just the cost of switching. And sometimes it could be expensive. Sometimes it could be very little. But so when you ask me about resources, that's how we're managing them.
I like it. Do you know, I mean, compared to your peers or other federal agencies, like what stage of maturity would you say you guys are in? I mean, obviously you're quite well far down the road, but are you able to like teach others, or are others adopting your style, or are you kind of an outlier?
Um, I kind of don't know,
Hmm.
and I have some intuition and perceptions, but I have to tell you that I care about my business, right? So I like to say I mind my own business. Not that I'm not interested in what others are doing, but I'm singularly focused on a couple of major projects and focusing my enterprise to get in the right spot. So I don't often go and check what my peers are doing, but I will tell you this, those places that are doing it, I like to steal those ideas and those ideas from other federal agencies. I like to call it tuition. We pay for that
Hmm.
tuition. I don't like to pay for it twice. I will go to those very influential places that are ahead of me and gain from them. There aren't too many that I know of, but that doesn't mean there aren't many out there. But there aren't too many that I know of that are doing what we're doing. But those places that are having a similar type of success.
Yeah.
And when they deviate from that, maybe they start it and then they stop it. They don't have the strategic discipline. They get a new boss who wants to go, custom stuff. I see them fits and starts, but those who have the strategic discipline to stay with it have been very successful.
Yeah. It's great. But I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, but I want to summarize for people who are thinking about it. Tell us about these, both the financial and the speed benefits you got from this work that you're doing. You talked about some of the reduced costs, but especially you mentioned speed quickly. I want to linger a little bit more on how that's been in terms of how fast it is to make these apps.
Sure. So on my data applications, which are essentially massaging data and using them to make informed decisions, I can I, I like to do a couple of things that make it very speedy. One, I want to have people provision the same day in a particular space. So everything that my data as a service provides points to that. So that you as a user don't have the friction of IT that makes you disappointed from the beginning. So the first thing is getting to the door. The thing is, once you're there, to get oriented very rapidly. Those two things represent two of the fundamental pieces for adoption that relate to speed. So to answer your question on the data piece, we can have people inside doing data in a couple of days, at the most, a couple of months at the far edge.
Sure.
They can learn at different paces, and depending on how complex it could be. So some, in my initial inclination was these folks are getting in there on day one, doing something similar to a spreadsheet, and then they're backing out. What I found was that was not the case. The vast majority of them are very complex with workflows, with external interfaces, with joining tables and so forth. So it became very easy for people to do these kinds of things. So folks could build apps within a couple 3 days at no cost, because our cost model is a firm fixed price for the licenses for the enterprise, and
Hmm.
then we do whatever we want inside.
Yeah.
For our other apps, it takes a little bit of timing, and I like to have my apps that ingest information. I like to my theory is that I need a minimum viable product that can be shippable within 180 days.
Right.
So 179 days is my target. So how do I do that? A couple of ways. One, we have an SDK, right? A software developer's kit, which is very common in the industry. In fact, that's why we have it. Honestly, a lot of federal agencies don't. And that's an impediment because it's kind of hard to figure out what the rules are. So we make it very simple. I want to tell you what the boundaries are and what the rules are up front. And then the second thing is it's an automated continuous improvement, continuous delivery pipeline, so that the code base that gets submitted goes through very rapidly. It's not going to be subject to a lot of people's interpretation and what day of the week it is and whether they're, angry that day or elated that day. We just want to make it very common. And then the third thing is what I think is our secret sauce. I call them my Sherpas. And I think immediately when I say that, you have this image of that guy with a huge pack helping you climb Mount Everest. And that's exactly what my Sherpas do.
Hmm.
They know the path. They're digital athletes, and they're high altitude digital athletes that can get you to the summit and back safely. my people don't want to be IT developers their whole life. They're going to
Right.
do a thing, they're going to make it work, they're going to move on, and they're going to use that thing for many years until it breaks, until something else better comes along, and they have a threshold moment to change. But they're all, more or less going to stay there. They don't need to learn the path. They just need to know how to do it once. My
Mm.
Sherpas will. And my Sherpas will know the latest techniques, the latest equipment, the latest routes. They'll know everything about the meteorology, the topology, all those kinds of things. So you don't have to. And so that's part of my secret sauce is to have these Sherpas. And I assign a Sherpa to every project from day one, and every week they check in with them. And they
Mm.
share with them the dangers they're going to encounter, help them traverse those dangers with a number of courses of action, a number of different ways to get there. And they let the team make the choices.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Georgia, speaking to the maturity model of the people I get to talk to about this, I can definitely affirm that what you've created is really remarkable. So just congratulations on what you've been able to do so far. And it's really great to see how you've been able to unleash this, and two, in a federal agency where sometimes there's extra restrictions and you're able to really push through that. So congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. We appreciate you coming on, sharing what you've done. I'm sure a lot of people would love to kind of find you online and pick your brain for things. So we'll let people search for you for that. But yeah, we just are grateful for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolutely. If you like to, I'm certainly open to it. You'll find me very easily on all the social media platforms related to business. George Forbes, and it's not hard. I'm very open to sharing our story, particularly with other federal agencies. Again, because I don't want you to pay the tuition again. Happy to share these recipes for success.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.